Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Witches Movie Coven. Grab your goat, grab something to drink, maybe some popcorn, maybe some merch, and it's witches talking about witches. But since this is live, we want you guys to put your 2 cents and 3 cents and 12 cents in as well. So follow along in the chat and we will pull you in and read and listen. Let's do a little catch up. We're waiting for Courtney. Courtney's in a thunderstorm somewhere, and hopefully she will show up. If not, we're sending her good love. Hi, Haley. We're glad you made it. Hi, Mary Jane. Hi, Sleep. Sleep was here before we were here, though, so I don't know who that is. So today we are talking about the movie Big Fish. I just saw it for the first time. I'm just finishing it up. I hold things to last minute. And it's so different than everything else we've been watching. That's all I'm going to say to start out with. Anybody have anything they want to catch up with or want to save it to the end?
Should we? I mean, I guess we could save it to the end.
Okay, we'll save it for the end. Well, Richard-Lael, you are the storyteller of our family. You have story time all the time. And this movie is a great big old story. So do you want to lead us in before we get to Heather's facts?
Be delighted. So this film is the story about fatherhood, it's about a kid who grew up hearing all of his father's amazingly magical stories that could never have possibly have happened. And then because of those stories, it causes a rift. And he decides that he wants nothing to do with his father because he just wants one day that's about himself. And then his father gets sick. And then he and his wife fly back from Paris, and they have to sort of deal with dad is dying, and now they have to settle the estate and figure out who is this man. I've always known the stories you've told, but I've never known my father. And so in the course of the chain of events, the father ends up by dying, and the family deals with that. And that's all I'll say to start with, because I don't want to spoil it for later. But I do have other stories as to why this is so important to me.
Okay, we will do that. Now, this is a Tim Burton film, so that might lead us into something of what about the stylized of the film, a Tim Burton film. Heather, do you want to go into any of your beautiful Heather facts?
Well, I don't have too many. This is, my focus is Tim Burton comes and goes in witch films because of the nature of his interests. So we have in the witch film genre, if you will, we have Tim Burton shows up periodically, dots the landscape, starting in, I believe, in the 90s with, we have Nightmare Before Christmas, we have Corpse Bride, we have just so many different things because witches live on the edge of fantasy. It's actually the main genre even before horror, because witches have lived in fantasy since the Victorian era and into film to the beginning. So we see Tim Burton come and go. And so in here we see this is tangentially a witch film because we do have a witch. Now, the interesting part about this, now it doesn't really fit into the witch film strains that I always talk about, because this is something different. This really, like Patti said, this is something different than we're doing. This is not really a witch focused film. The witch comes into play here just a little bit because of that fantasy. And what's interesting is tying it into last week's film is that what they do in this movie is capitalize on that classic, probably if you could say there's two most classic witch characters. One is from Macbeth, the three witches around the cauldron. We see that. The other one is the Hansel and Gretel witch. In this film, we see the Baba Yaga figure, the Hansel and Gretel witch, who lives in the woods. They even talk about her eating children, etc., etc. So that's what we see here, which is a nice tie-in to last week's film that we talked about. So, there's a lot, this is obviously a Tim Burton film. It's got a great cast. Did anyone see Miley Cyrus in it? I hope you did notice her. She was there, 8 years old. You catch her just in a, she shows up. Very, very obvious face when she is on camera. She's there. She's 8, I believe. Other than that, I don't have a whole, what? We got to go back and find her.
Yeah.
You're
I've watched
flabbergasted.
this film 50 times and I have never seen her. But now that I'm thinking back, is she the little girl in the town of Spectre?
Yes.
Under the
No.
table?
She's in the flashback, went to the house, to the witch's house, and there's a little girl.
Oh, yeah.
That, and then she's again in the church. So you see her a couple of times.
I could always tell it was her because I was like, why is this 8-year-old smoking?
So yeah, but so I'm going to leave it at that, and I am going to say a little bit more later when I talk about my interest in the film, because there's a lot of things to be said about it that have nothing to do with witchcraft, but then yet have to do with witchcraft or the spirit of witchcraft. So I'll get to that later. But the one thing I do want to add here is Father's Day is coming up. So like Richard-Lael said, this is about fatherhood. This is about our relationship with our father. I have a very good relationship with my father. And so this can be a very powerful film for people with that type of relationship with those kind of strings. And Father's Day is coming up. So I'm glad we're doing this film right now.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, I just enjoyed every second of it personally. I'll just go there and it's like, it was a storytelling and here and there and the fantasy and the magic. But then the reality brought in of the father-son relationship and the son wanting so much more. And I felt it all. And the mom, she was so beautiful in this, mom.
Oh, yes.
Sang.
You're about to see me ugly cry.
She was amazing. They did a beautiful job with her character.
Yeah. And you just saw the love. You saw everything that was
Jessica Lange is brilliant in everything she does.
Mm-hmm.
She truly is.
But the love that she had, that you could tell she had that love and she knew that it was the end and she loved this man. She loved him.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I saw the film the first time in the theater, that interaction that she had with the man playing the father figure, that's what really broke my heart because I knew that my father was going to go. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to cry now again, but I knew that it was going to be hard on my mother. And that was the whole thing. The whole thing broke my heart. I didn't mean to steamroll.
It's okay.
No.
It's okay. It's Father's Day. Yeah, no, I even related my father's stuff. And my father was almost opposite of that. My dad was not a talker. My dad, he was never fought. We had the best relationship, but he was so quiet. All we did was play cribbage together and eat Hershey bars. And I was thinking, wow, I wish I knew some stories about my father, real ones or made up ones. There's something to the storytelling.
Yeah, there is. And I think that's it's a beautiful part of the things that we pass down to our hear from our grandparents, from our ancestors, from our parents, and then pass down to our kids are these stories. And whether they're real or not, I think that mythology that we create, that modern mythology, is so powerful, and that ties into magic. But we can get into that later. But just on a personal level, I think it's so important to tell these stories. I love to tell the stories to my kids. I love to sit, and my dad would tell stories. He grew up in LA in the 50s, and I love to hear the stories of him and his brothers and what it was like then. And then, of course, my mom growing up in New Jersey, I love to hear her stories of what it was like in her life. And I'm surrounded now by antiques in my house because I always say everything in my house that I put up has a story, and I'm happy to share it. And as a Gemini, that could be a problem for people who visit. So I think that's what makes this beautiful and important film. Is that message.
So do you tell, I mean, not that we're going to get all personal on this because these are movie reviews, but do you tell stories with your kids?
I do. And in fact, we were talking tonight about what our earliest memory was. I was trying to get out of them to tell me, what is your earliest memory? So we were talking about that. And it's nice to share that. It creates that mythology. And there I go again, freezing. I tried to reset my computer and I'm frozen again. So hopefully not in a weird pose.
Not this time.
No, you're fine. You are fine.
I have to get a new computer clearly because this is getting ridiculous. But yeah, so that is one of the beautiful parts of this film and the beautiful messages is how the importance of storytelling and the importance of bonding through storytelling.
I saw this film for the first time in the theater. There goes Heather. She'll be back. I saw this film a long time ago when it first came out in the movie theater. I was on a date, and it was this new Tim Burton film, and I thought, great, it's going to be this Tim Burton film. And I went in and I sat down, and then I proceeded to cry like a baby the entire time. And it was so beautiful that it was right before my father passed away, and he never went to the movies because he thought that movies was witchcraft, and he was a Pentecostal minister, and witchcraft was just not something you could do. But I got my father and my mother and my brother to all go to see Big Fish in the theater. And my father was crying, and my mother was crying, and I was crying. And then on a personal note, it wasn't too long thereafter, my father died on my 25th birthday, and I always knew that he was going to, and I know it sounds extravagant, but my father always had a magical life like that. And he carried this crooked stick that would annoy me as a kid because he would always spell different words with it. He'd twist it around and he'd spell these words. And I would say, Dad, couldn't you just leave it in the car? Because I just want to go in and come back, and please don't talk to anybody about your stick. Well, when he died, I gave the eulogy, and with your permission, could I still, all these years later, remember it? Could I give it to you now?
Absolutely.
Because it does pertain to the movie. So when my father was there in his casket, and I stood up and gave the eulogy, I said, my father was a great man. He and I didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and he didn't see himself in me, and I didn't see myself in him. And my father always carried this crooked stick, but it was not just any crooked stick. It was a magic stick. This stick, it was with him his entire life. He knew when he was 18 years old, he went into a deep, dark forest. And there in the middle of that wood was a giant yellow cat. And he knew he could make that cat bend to his will. And he jumped on the back of that cat, and that cat ripped and snorted and tore up the earth. And when that cat finally began to purr and calm itself down, my father got off the back of that cat, and there on the floor, on the ground, was a stick that he counted the rings, and it was planted the day he was born. Now, this stick was not just any old stick. It was a magic stick. And it spoke of God and of love and of joy, and anything that would bring beauty to the world was what this man spoke of through this magic stick. And he carried it everywhere. And this man was a magical human being. And yet, the truth behind the story is that big, dark forest was nothing but a thicket on the end of the property. That big yellow cat was a caterpillar front-end loader. And that old stick was just an old stick. But to quote the film, that made me understand how much I loved my father, he became what he always was, a big fish. And I will not stand before you and remove 1 ounce of magic from this man's life, because his life affected so many. And I stand here grateful for the man that was, and grateful to be the man that I am because of him. And that was the eulogy. So the film really made me realize how very much I loved my father. He drove me crazy. He drove me so crazy. And we didn't see anything eye to eye. We weren't eye to eye. And I remember when I was about 9, and I was sitting on a cinder block. My father was working on the Buick. He had a Buick. And he was working on the car, and I sat next to him, and my little hands were just flailing, and I was wearing pink and blue. And my father rolled out from under the car, and he dusted himself off, and his low Southern voice dropped about 3 octaves, and he said, son, I want you to stop acting like I want you to start acting more like a boy. And I didn't know what that meant. But to prove how good and kind he was, that year for my 10th birthday, he built me a 3-foot tall Barbie house. And then as a teenager, I got into wearing suits all the time because I wanted to as a kid. But in my teens, it was sort of laugh at this, don't laugh at that. I can control this, and you can laugh at my clothing, and that's fine, but I can't control who I am. And so people would say, who's that weird kid? And my father would say, that's my son. And he wears a top hat and wears spats and carries a cane. And if I could, I'd dress just like him. But the film, seeing it on film, seeing the fact that, my father fought in the Korean War. He never talked about it. He never talked about what he saw. He talked about the fact that there were spirits that had told him to walk across the street right before artillery shells exploded. I mean, it was one death mission after another, but he knew, my father always knew how he was going to die. That was what he said. And so the film was expertly portrayed, and it really showed that story of a man who grew up in the Great Depression, in the 40s, in the 50s, and then met the love of his life. And even like that story of how he was in love with the mother. My mother and father had chance encounters several times, but the first was when my father was 18, right when he found that stick, and my mother was 9. But because wow. he came too early. My father came too early, and my father was driving a truck, and my mother was driving from Illinois through Missouri to from California to Illinois. Anyway, she was driving through Missouri, and my father said he remembered this little girl and her brother, assumed her brother, jumping up and down on the back of this 1930s truck with a washing machine rolling around in the back. And so my father tooted the horn and waved at them. And then years later, when they actually met, then it was love at first sight, and they were married for 35 years.
Beautiful.
So you really do have the movie thing going, 8:28 versus 9:19. Wow, that was your movie.
Yeah, it was your movie.
It really was my film, and and as far as witchcraft goes, there's multiple levels of it. So the art of storytelling is power. It's witchcraft. It is something that we go way back, and even my first introduction to folk magic was through my father, who, when we moved to this little tiny town of, I think, 500 people, maybe. We went around the property with red string, sea salt, and olive oil. And he blessed the property, and he said, the cord binds us together. It's a promise of love. It's a promise of the family. The sea salt is a preservative. It preserves who we are and what we are. And the olive oil represents the newness and the freshness. And it's folk magic. It's really, it's folk magic. And now you wouldn't call him a witch. He would never have gone for that, but it was folk magic.
That's
and
beautiful.
So, yeah. So the film really spoke to me on multiple levels.
That is so beautiful. Let's go into some of the witchy thoughts about it. I mean, there wasn't a lot of witch in there, but she's a major plot point as to what happened, right?
And it's Helena Bonham Carter chewing up scenery like she does, and basically playing Helena Bonham Carter in a Tim Burton film, which is not a bad thing. It's just an expected thing at that particular period of time.
She's fantastic.
And you can't imagine anyone else being in that movie in that role.
No,
in a Tim Burton film, right?
And I liked how she said that people thought that the girl grew up and then just was in the woods alone, and they thought that she was a witch,
which was typical. And that's the role of the in a lot of, especially in more recent ones, that's what we talk about when we see that often women who are alone, unmarried, don't fit in the patriarchy, aren't fitting into the roles, are deemed a witch because they're independent. So yeah, that was a very purposeful thing. And this is the time where she was also, I don't know if she had already played, because I don't remember the timing of it, the witch in Harry Potter. So, you're seeing her again there. They're making the connection. But it is a minor role. It is a minor piece. It's a fantasy piece. It sort of plays into the combination of fantasy versus what's real in the stories and what's not real in the stories. And so she kind of plays into that. And I don't think witchcraft is considered real. I think that's part of the fantasy aspect. And there I'm frozen again. So
and you are correct. It is a minor role, but and witchcraft is fantasy. But at the end of the funeral, when all of the cars are there and everyone is stepping out of the cars, and you realize that even though they were fantastic, they were all of the stories had a basis in reality. And even I think in the witchcraft as well, there was a basis in reality. Again, the folk magic that my father taught me, it was just, it was a basis in reality. My father used to talk about an auntie who, now I never saw it. She died before I was born, but he said he had an auntie who would make tables levitate across the room. Was it fantasy? I don't know. I don't know.
And that's the point, is that the idea that she was called a witch because she lived alone and was an old woman or whatever the case, that's the reality part of it. And did she do some things, some folk magic? Maybe she did. But there's also the element of the storytelling aspect. And what I love about the message at the end, and this applies to folk magic and witchcraft, because we use a lot of mythology and storytelling in it, is what it evokes. Is that telling the story, I went to the supermarket, and this is the message of the film. I went to the supermarket and bought milk. Okay, so that's not really going to evoke anything. That's just fact. Okay, that just tells you what I did. But if you're trying to evoke feeling, if you're trying to evoke energy, to magic, whatever, you tell it in a way with words and language and expression that is very, very different, And so that's what, and does it matter? Because I think in the end, the father in this case was not just the facts of what he did. He was the stories. And that's what he says at the end. He goes, you know who I am for real. You saw who I am for real. He was as much the energy and the magic of his stories, and the false magical, or the mystical and the mythological parts of his stories, as he was the facts of what happened. And he couldn't separate the two. And there's a Walter Mitty kind of part of that, I think, definitely. But at the same time, we all do that. And I think in witchcraft, sometimes when we do spell work or rituals, we add those layers on because it helps evoke whatever we're trying to get at. So I think that's the important message, is that we're not just I went to the supermarket and then I bought my milk, where I skipped to the supermarket and the sun was shining and the beams were flowing down on me and I felt them drape over me with the golden, we're all of that. We're all of that, because that's what that's part of humanity. I mean, I don't know. I can't express it. There's more to it than just the boring parts of what we do.
No, that was beautifully said. But also the son, because the son felt neglected and everything else, he always would see where the father might have, gone bigger than it was. The son went worse than it was. The son just assumed he had to have another family, and he had to have this affair with this girl that he didn't have an affair with. He did all sorts of things, but how humans tend to think the worst versus the best.
We also kind of create our own reality too, to a degree, right? If we see our life in mythic forms, then we're going to have those stories, and they're real to us, even if they don't exactly happen as we think they happen. I know as an initiated witch, I had an initiation ceremony. I thought it was brilliant. I wasn't allowed to see the script for it or anything. And then when we were finally allowed to, because we were doing our own initiations, I read it and looked at my wife, and it's like, this isn't what we did. And she's like, it's exactly what we did. But in my brain, it was something else. It was something probably bigger and bolder and more magnificent, but it was just as real to me. Like the experiences that I thought I had are just as real to me as the words that were on a piece of paper. And I think my grandfather was one of those kind of people who lived that big life. And I know that he did not steal secret plans in World War II, but he liked to talk about stealing secret plans in World War II. And it made us happy to hear him talking about those plans. And, he was in Tokyo like 5 days after the war ended. I mean, who knows? Maybe he did.
And I think it's important to emphasize how, like you said, this is something that means a lot for us. It means a lot for our humanity. It means a lot for every day, because everyday life is boring. And this is why we need artists and poets and writers. We can't just have mathematicians and accountants and scientists who live by facts. We need them, but we also need the balance of the artists and the poets who can paint those stories beyond the facts to give us, because life without that is extremely boring and drudgery
and out of balance. I mean, out of balance. This is one of my favorite stories. And again, my local elementary school took all the art and electives and fun classes out of the school. The school went down to like one of the lowest 10% in LA County schools, so no one sent their kids there. I'm on the board of the Arts Council. We brought in drawing and improv and photography and art and dance and sketch. And guess what? Their math and reading and writing skills went up. You have to have a balance. So I didn't like them throwing the cat off the, I know the cat landed okay in the circus, but I've got this animal thing as I don't even like circuses like that. So didn't need to do the cat. Just saying.
The cat jumped, but that was, the circus, some of the circus scenes were a little bit strange for me, but it's Tim Burton, so there's gonna be
where'd the werewolf come from? That was
okay, well, yeah.
Well, I think that the old man had to make it a story, had to make a reason why he had to make it a reason. More than likely, the ringmaster was a mean old drunk, and maybe that was what the gun was originally for. Maybe that was, but what's a better story? A mean old drunk, or, well, he turned into a werewolf and then I saved him.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. That's good. Plus the thing, he was the mean old drunk, and like the contracts, it's like, I worried about the giant signing the contract because it was like
he was really, right,
and then the hero should have helped him not sign that contract. I'm a bad storyteller. Don't rob the bank. That's not good. But
exactly.
When I on another personal level, and back again on what you're saying of how important it is to have a little bit of magic. Before when I was 5, I was 4, almost 5. My father came down with Guillain-Barré, French polio, and he was paralyzed. This much I know for a fact. He was paralyzed. He was in the hospital. He was declared dead. He was legally dead for a long time. I don't know the amount of time, but enough time for them to cover up the sheet and for everyone to leave the room and the nurse to come back and fill out the paperwork. And my father said that he remembered he was conscious the entire time, and he heard the nurse, and he cleared his throat, and she stopped. She walked back to the foot of the bed, and he could hear, and she gets right up to the side of him, and she picks up the corner of the sheet, and for the first time in months, my father sat straight up. "How are you today?" he said. And the nurse, she screamed and she fainted. She fell on the floor. The doctor came back, and he was, according to my father, as white as a sheet. And he said, "What happened?" And my father said, "I don't know, doc. I just spoke to her and she passed out on the floor." The doctor said, "Well, let me tell you, if a corpse had raised out of bed and talked to you, you'd pass out too." But the lead up to that, he went home. He went home the day and the night before my birthday. And the lead up to that, everyone would ask me, "Richie," because that's what I was then, "Richie, what do you want for your birthday?" And I would say, "My father is coming home for my birthday." And they would go, "Oh, bless. You poor little dumb kid. You don't know. Bless your little heart." And so my father came home for my birthday, and I was sitting there coloring, and my father came in the wheelchair, and my mother said, "Well, honey, your father came home. Aren't you excited?" And I went, "I knew he was going to, but I'll have him for 20 more years." And then he died 20 years and the day and the night after my 25th birthday.
Wow.
But my father would tell the story that when he came home, I ran around screaming, "My daddy came home." And my mother would tell me, "That's not what happened. That's not what happened. But let him think that because it makes him feel good. But that's not what happened. You already knew. You weren't excited." But you have to have a little bit of that story. And then I watched there's a theory about water too. Water is magical, as you know. It helps to. Oh, look who's here! Look who is here!
It's me,
Courtney Buckley.
Courtney Buckley.
Courtney Buckley.
Hi guys, my internet came back, so
And I'm so excited. Mine froze.
I'm just glad you survived the storm.
It was the purple. You know how like it like ranges in color from like the purple dots were coming right to me. So they shook my house and my internet went out and it was a production, but where it seems like it's over now. I don't know if there's more coming, but I did not have to go to the basement. So that seems like a win for me.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm sorry.
Wow.
I feel like I interrupted something.
No.
No.
We're just we're talking movie. We're talking movie.
I love that.
Jump on in. So do you want to jump right in? Your thoughts on Big Fish?
Okay, so full disclosure, I was watching it when my internet went out, so I only got halfway through. But I went and saw it in the movie theaters when it came out, and I remember loving it and sobbing my brains out. And watching it again, as much as I did, like, first of all, I love Tim Burton. I love, like, it's such a fairy tale to me, this whole thing. And but like so impactful and so beautifully done. And I feel like this is one of those movies that every time you watch it, you get something different out of it. So I love it. So rewatching, I mean, I'm definitely like, now that my internet's back up, even though the show is going to be over, I'm going to finish watching it tonight because I remembered how much I loved it. So that's what I have to just jump in with, but I'm interested to hear what everybody else is saying.
Do you have quotes though, or only half of the quotes? I mean, that's one of the things that I most look forward to now.
There's a quote. I looked them up. I had to cheat. I looked them up. But there's a quote that as soon as it popped up, I remembered, like, I mean, and this is back when I had like MySpace and all that, like, you know, so I had it on everything.
Wow,
And
this
it
movie was released in like the 1920s.
on the AOL disc that I put in my computer. And it made it
Right,
back my stuff.
exactly.
But it popped right up, and I remembered like plastering this on everything because I loved it so much and connected with it so hard. So it's not a funny one, but it's an emotional one. A man tells his stories so many times that he becomes the stories, and they live on after him and in the way that he becomes immortal. And I think that's beautiful. I think that speaks to me because when I was young, I lost a lot of people that I loved. And guys, I've been on for 2 seconds, so the tears are coming. I lost a lot of people that were really important to me. And it made me feel, hearing that line and like remembering that line makes me feel like nobody's ever really gone. And that sort of shaped, I think, not fully, but it shaped how I think about life. Like, it gave me almost a purpose, like wanting people to remember, like doing something, treating people in a way that like they'll tell stories about you, and that's how you leave a legacy. And it's not about having money, and it's not about working a job, and it's not about anything, but it's about how you make people feel. So
when someone
Great.
passes, in the magical world, one of the things you often hear is what is remembered lives. And
Yep.
it's our stories that make us remembered. And there are so many good stories. I know when bad things happen to me, I often think, though, like my friends, like, "Oh, I'm so sorry this happened," and I'm like, "It's a great story. We're gonna be able to talk about this for the next 20 or 30 years, maybe 60 years down the road. Somebody else will be talking about it, and stories are our legacies."
It's true.
Yeah, and stories attached to emotion, and when you embellish your story, because I one of my weird psychic gifts is I see the chords. We cut the chords, those strings of chords of love, all those things. But all those chords really, in all my experience, are memories, and memories attached to emotion. And like what you were saying earlier, Heather, I went to the store and got milk. There's not a lot of emotion attached to that. What this guy added was all the emotion that made us feel. So that changed everything.
Yep. And I was going to add, I think there's something Courtney said is, and now I'm completely forgetting what you actually said, but I think that one of the things that for me growing up is that I was so immersed with artists around me. I was so immersed in hearing the stories from my father's childhood, from my mother, and very fascinated with that. And also I get going back to Walter Mitty, because the Walter Mitty story, not the movie, but the book, hit and stories where people get lost in their fantasy, get lost in creating this life, was always something mystifying to me, something that I loved. And I think that's part of the reason I started exploring witchcraft and started exploring the occult, because it allows for that. It allows you to embrace the creative side of yourself, no matter what you're doing, and allows you to create who you are. And so I was always fascinated with that ability and with this storytelling. Maybe because of my Gemini nature, maybe it's because of, who knows, but I love this idea that you could become whatever it is, and you can create these stories and live in this fantasy world. Now, of course, a Walter Mitty character takes it too far, and you can take it too far, but I love that aspect of it. And so this was really fascinating to me. This conversation that the movie is having between the two characters is fascinating. And the son kept saying again, I want to know the real you, because he was failing to see that was the real father, and I like both Courtney and Richard-Lael, was a mess at the end of this movie, crying. I have a very close connection to my father. So as soon as that deep connection that he actually have, now I have always had a deep connection to my father, still do to this day, and my mother as well. But and this is about fatherhood. So feeling that end and feeling that tension as they come together. And then as soon as the father passes, that was the end of me. Like, absolute the enemy, because I haven't faced what Richard-Lael's faced yet, but when I do, it's going to be profound. So that, you know, I was a mess by the end. And I think that my parents' stories will live inside of me. And like I said, I collect antiques, but specifically things that my parents have made. I have my great grandmother's china. I have my grandparents' art in my house. I'm surrounded by these stories, and this to me is magic. This to me is part of my witchcraft. It's the connection to the ancestors, to their stories that we can then pass on, good and bad, because all of our ancestors and stories are not good. But like Jason said, they are good stories because we learn from them, and they make us who we are, whether they're good or bad stories. And so I surround myself in it. So this is what Big Fish is about. And this is what Tim Burton, this is probably one of the best uses for Tim Burton's style, is to merge reality and fantasy. So I'm going to keep repeating the same thing over and over.
If I can jump in too, like just to speak to what you just said, you know, I unfortunately did not have a good relationship, if any relationship, with my father. And this movie, I think at the time when I saw it, was so powerful to me because it forced me into grieving what I never had and always wanted. And it was almost like a wake-up call. And the fact that like a movie can do this is huge, but this is truly impactful in this way. But then it's taking that and, you know, remembering those feelings and becoming a parent and turning it around and making sure that, like, you know, my son has stories of me and doesn't, you know what I mean? And it's learning from the bad and fixing it and breaking the cycle. And I think there's something magical in doing that too, you know, like, and it's a very similar emotion, just coming from a very different place. Mm-hmm. But I think it's like, that's one of my favorite things about this movie, is that it has the power to touch people in all these different ways. Mm-hmm.
This conversation is touching me in a lot of ways. Like I'm like on the verge of tears, like hearing things, because it's also, I think one of the things this movie does though is like dredges up feelings and things, and maybe things that we forget about with relationships with parents. I had a bad relationship with my mother. She left when I was little. Great relationship with my dad, who was always the strongest person I'd ever known. And then when my grandfather died, which was a year before this movie came out, I remember I was in my dad's SUV with my brother, and I was lucky to be with Ari. I had never seen my father cry, and we were driving to the funeral, and to see that emotion come out on his face, I mean, it just made all of us cry, and I'd never seen that. But at the end of the film, though, when you see these bonds, you feel the love, like you cry because you love. Right. And that's a good thing, because when you love, you remember, and you carry a piece of them with you.
And everybody was there. I mean, when they turned around and everybody was there, it was like, that was the end of me. That was the end of me. Literally, I'm sitting there. Yeah. I'm like, but I cry at every movie. Like, I cry at commercials. So it's so that was going to be. But I think the bonding, I think stories are our bonding. Stories are what make us human. Stories are what connect us deeply to each other. And I think we forget that. We don't bond over just walking to the store and getting milk. We bond over the emotional connection of, yes, I felt that too. And there I go again, every time I talk. So I think that's the beauty of this, is getting past. The son had to get past this notion of what I want to know, who the real you. He wanted to know that his dad just walked to the store and got milk. But the dad kept saying there's more to it. And that's what the wife saw in him. There was more to it.
Yeah. And this was perfect timing for this movie with Father's Day this week. This is not a good freeze for you, Heather, but you're back.
Okay. I'm back. Sorry. I'm getting a new computer before next week, or I'm kicking everybody off the Wi-Fi in my house right now, because I don't know what's going on upstairs.
I have a question. Let's get off of the emotional for a second. We can go back there. Was time sped up weird? Like it seemed like in the beginning it was way a million years ago. Like cars kept changing by more years than they should have been, or was that just me?
I think yes, it was sped up, but he explains that time doesn't make sense unless you're in the story. And because the son says, well, if you're the little girl, how can you be the old witch?
Right.
Because time doesn't make sense. And I think also Tim Burton wanted it to be sort of timeless. And for me, my father was born in 1930, and then he had an orange GTO that was not the same as the car in the film, but it looked a lot like that. So time is irrelevant, I think.
Yeah, because I started to notice the time by the music. And look at this. I loved it. I loved the music and I love the time. My other weird, completely off the emotional or storyline is the naked girl fish. How come she wasn't a mermaid? I guess that's a whole different story.
It was barely there. She kind of just blipped in and out a couple of times. So they really didn't fully explain.
Well, the naked girl in the river was the fish. It's weird because the old man becomes the fish, but his wife is the fish, and that's what the whole story is, that he caught the fish with the wedding ring. So the girl in the river was his wife, who is also the fish, but he's also the fish.
If I've ever had one complaint about Tim Burton movies, is that sometimes they are disjointed a little bit. Like the storytelling isn't as cohesive as some of us might like. You just kind of get dropped into scenes and dropped out of scenes. They're beautiful scenes with a lot of imagination, but sometimes you're kind of left wondering what exactly happened. And, and there are a couple times watching this, I felt that way back in the theater, but it all comes together at the end so beautifully. It's hard to have any criticism.
I want to add a note about the music, which I forgot to mention earlier. The music here is done by Danny Elfman. Danny Elfman is brilliant. I mean, I don't have to say anymore. Danny Elfman, you'll know him from The Nightmare Before Christmas. He did the Summersby movie as well. And I remember watching Summersby after, and I'm going, what is this fantastic music? And of course, it was Danny Elfman.
Batman.
So what was that? Batman. Yeah,
Michael Keaton Batman.
If he's just brilliant at this, and so the music we have to name him. We have to say thank you, Danny Elfman, for the music, beautiful music, because he's brilliant, and of course does a fantastic job with Tim Burton again.
Right. And was it Oingo Boingo, as our musician producer Rob pointed out?
It's a dead man's party. Yeah. That's it. Oingo Boingo shows up in Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield, which we'll never review on this show.
Get no respect.
So yeah, you can't beat a film that has two brilliant artists talking about creativity and art and storytelling. I mean, it's like, right?
And a great cast.
Oh, fantastic cast. I mean, Miley Cyrus, come on.
I have to go watch that again. I love Miley Cyrus. I don't know why you recognize her at 8.
He didn't even list it in the list on the bottom. Where's Miley Cyrus in the list?
He took it away real quick. He's gonna add it.
I love Ian McGregor, and that's why we saw this in the theater originally, because my wife would leave me for him in 2 seconds, and I wouldn't blame her. But I will say, as someone who has lived in the South for lengthy periods of his life, his Southern accent is quite a thing to behold.
No, I totally forgot to bring that up. You are so right, Jason.
Yeah.
The accents were Southern accents. No.
Helena
Bonham Carter's this bad too. Like,
no.
Yeah. Just
because everybody tries to do a Southern accent, copying something that comes from Savannah, coastal South. They try to do the New Orleans or the coastal South, and these people were not in the coastal South. They were in the middle of the country South. That's a very, very different accent. It was bothering me the whole time. There she is, Miley Cyrus.
The real accent, what it would have been. Now, mind you, I do not sound like people from Missouri. because for one, I say Missouri and not Missouri, but truly Missouri, it's sort of is the middle of the road, and there's not really any real accent because they have so many and none at all. So I think really I think the film overtried it with a southern drawl, which is much more coastal and much more genteel.
It's the romanticized southern accent more than anything else.
Yeah. That accent was they were very trying for the Savannah, like you said. It's very much the Gone with the Wind fake South accent they were going with, and it just I didn't know in 2003, although I was living here then. I probably wouldn't notice, but now that I've lived here for so long in the South, I'm like, oh no, this accent is all wrong.
I mean, you would have assumed that Tim Burton would have gone to Alabama, stayed there for a couple of weeks, and done a deep dive into accents and research, but apparently that did not happen.
Seriously, someone should have.
So we've had a couple of films lately where the accents have been kind of one of the weaker points in it, but maybe it just worked for, like you guys said, for the romanticism. Well, we are getting close to the end, and we haven't checked in yet, but we do have to wands up, wands down. Everybody. Now, you guys in the chat room, wands up, wands down. If you saw it, we want to know.
Is this the first time?
Is it unanimous?
It
is.
First time, I think.
This is like the first time that we've cried over a film during the show, except for the ones that were so bad that we cried.
Yeah.
It's very, very different tonight. Very different.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm opening
with us, it's across the board up so far in the chat room. Hey, Robert, I call it across the line up. This, I think, is a first ever of all the things we've seen.
I feel like it's like fully unanimous, not just us, which is shocking, but also in the chat as well.
Okay.
It's a beautiful film.
If you haven't seen it, I guess we all recommend it. Yeah. One's up. So there
if you want to cry, especially.
If you want to cry, because we're all crying here.
Yeah.
All right, but we have a couple more minutes. So why doesn't everybody check in and see what's been going on? Last in, first out. Courtney, how about you?
Okay, so I have two things. One is nice shirt, Jason.
I love it.
This one might be my favorite. I'm just gonna say that. But also, everyone, make sure you're sitting down, collect yourselves, and prepare to receive this information. I have a friend. She is a doll, and I love her, and she has slept with me every night since she came home.
Oh.
If you look at for all of us who can see Not a Doll, though, I mean, there's like a slashing thing going on there.
Yeah, Not a Doll looks angry.
You can see the rage in Not a Doll's eyes. There's some jealousy going on.
Let me turn on that rage. Hold on. There she goes.
Oh.
No, we don't want that.
Well, she is beautiful, and she looks like she is made for you. She looks like
she was made for me. And Not a Doll, be quiet, please. Okay. So I mentioned before that I always, when I was a kid, wanted an American Girl doll, and I could never have one. And someone in this chat, Heather, sent me a text and said, what's the name of the doll that you know, the American Girl doll? And I told her, and she was an angel and said, I have one. I'm going to cry again. I have one, and I want to restore her for you and send her to you. And the minute I opened the box, it was like my inner child was healed, because maybe that's why I can't stand dolls, because I never got to have the connection with this one. But she's beautiful, and I love her. And she has hats. She has a bonnet, and it's beautiful. See, there she goes with that. Wow. And then, because it's cold in Massachusetts, not today, but it's cold in Massachusetts, when it's winter time, she has a little beanie hat. But my whole heart thanks you, Heather, and it was amazing. And I wish that you could have seen how embarrassing I was when I opened her.
Yay. We achieved it. That's awesome. I'm so
Thank
glad you love her.
Courtney.
I love her so much.
What soul did we put in the doll? That's the
None.
big question.
Mine, my inner child soul, and I'm going to take good care of her.
That's
Aw,
who's in there.
Not
Or
all
she'll-
dolls have to be haunted. You've got not a doll. She's haunted.
Okay, first of all, but I do have those other two coming at some point when I can get myself together to get them shipped. But those ones are going to cause some trouble. But
What day
not-
did you
not
what day
those
did
two.
you get her?
Tuesday? Last.
No, it was Monday because I was homesick from work, actually being miserable. And a
So
package
Heather
came.
probably put it in the mail the same time Pat Robertson died. And
I would never.
Jason!
I would never do that to anyone. Never.
boom.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Oh,
Sorry. Sorry about that joke, but I
How
saw
dare
it.
you.
It was
Cross
low
your
hanging
ears.
fruit. I took it. I took
All
it.
right. While you're there, Jason, what's new with you? Anything coming up?
Well, I mean, I have my shirt with my goats, like my little goat and Black Phillip. They're very excited that I was wearing this today. I'm also drinking from my beautiful Browich whiskey glass, which
Love
is
it.
a very generous pour of whiskey. I'm surprised I made it through the show. I'll be at the Starwood Festival in Southern Ohio in July, like the 15th, 16th, 17th. That's my next adventure. And I'm going to Napa this weekend. So if you're tasting wine, you might run into me, but it's unlikely that will happen, but who knows?
Beautiful. Thank you. Richard-Lael.
Well, I am going to be in Atlanta on the 2nd of September. It's a debauchery ball and it's a burlesque show. So if you're going to be there, that is that. We also need vendors. So people who are creative, message me. We would love to have you sell your wares at the event. So if you have anything that's dark or gothic or 1920s or fabulous, just let me know. We would love to have you sell. And then also there is something else on mysterycontrol.com, which is there are some things that are there that have my picture on them. And also Courtney might recognize these things.
Yep.
Because they are scared and alone.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Fun story.
Nice.
That red axe there is my next tattoo.
I
Just so everybody knows.
I like that we got Tom Cruise to do the modeling.
Young Tom.
Hey,
1986.
I must say that is beautiful. Soon, Mystery Control is going to be like the old Sears catalog or something. It's going to be a big fat book with, the Scared and Alone, with which is Movie Coven, with my spellcaster, with Power Panties, with everything. So everybody go shopping at mysterycontrol.com. And we still have 25% off if you just put code Patti, P-A-T-T-I, because it started with my Power Panties, code Patti, you could have these fabulous, that shirt's Heather Greene, correct?
I know, I forgot to mention that. Anything I order from Mystery Control going forward will be Heather Greene in honor of Heather Greene.
That's perfect. I love it.
We should just have a Heather Greene store, and then it'll just be green t-shirts and things. Obviously, Heather Greene.
I love it.
Heather, anything with you before we go?
Real quick, we're planning for Mystic South. That's mid-July, July 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th. We're going to have like 500 people there at this point. It's like just blossoming wonderfully. So come out. It's going to be super fun. And I just want to say I'm so excited about Courtney and the doll. I do restore dolls as a hobby. So I restore all kinds of dolls. So this is one I recently restored. That's my 120. She's fully restored.
Beautiful.
And this is Gladys. And so I did her too. So I restore dolls as a hobby. And I typically do not input spirits in them, Jason. So no, that is.
Well, I'm going to tell you something about Is it Gladys and her
Gladys.
She has seen some things, and
She
they have been haunted, I think, because
she is 120 years old, and she's fully restored now and not leaking 120-year-old sawdust. So I'm very excited about that.
As you picked her up, Heather, there was a spirit orb that went right behind you.
Yeah, really?
Really?
That may not have anything to do with her because we have my partner's mother lives in our house too, so that may have been my partner's mother. So,
I'm gonna let you guys know that my internet is going out again.
Oh,
after
no.
this conversation. So I'm just gonna have to go.
Damn that Pat Robertson.
Oh,
But
no.
anyway, go and come to Mystic South, join us here in Atlanta, and then come back to Atlanta in September again. Richard-Lael, we need to talk, and of course, I love to see you guys on my internets. Come to heathergreene.net and find me and talk to me on the internets and the interwebs and the socials and all the stuff. So reach out. I love talking about movies.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I am Patti Negri. You can find all the places I'm going at pattinegri.com. July, I've done a little bit of travel for filming, but pretty much that's it. August picks up again. I will be in New Orleans for Hex Fest. I will be in Michigan for my Paracon, which is a big one way up in Sault Ste. Marie. And then it's all bulls running September, October, November, December. So like us, follow us. We all have social media. We'd all be very happy if you like us, follow us, tell your friends, tell us what movies you want to see. And we've gone over time, but we started late. But we have one more thing to do, which is...